Soft clip's very handy. It's in there for that reason, and then the bend and granular stuff I already went over. So that's the pre-calc effects. It's a great way to just mangle stuff. So jumping back into some other Nerve features here, you know, if you can process the sounds as I showed there. When you want to start getting going, making a beat, you've got the sequencer area right up here. So everything's sort of visible all at once. So you're able to make a beat quickly, as well as sculpt the envelope or change the start point of the sample, all within one window. So I'm just drawing some velocity stocks here, which are the same as the notes for a kick drum part. And now I'll hit play in the host sequencer, and we can hear the kick drums now synchronized to our tempo and playing in sync. So you can do similarly to other stuff. If I wanted to add in a snare part, I could program that by hand, like this. You can also do it, if you prefer, by playing these pads themselves. So I'm going to do a little bit of that by hitting the record button up here. You can see I hear a click because I have this click lit up here. And now I'm just going to put in some hats. So now I've got some hats. Maybe add a little percussion. And now maybe I'll change the drum kit. So all of the sounds are going to now change, but I'm going to maintain having my pattern. And again, it's easy to scroll through the drum kits just right here. So that's a quick example of making a beat. It's very easy to save that if I wanted to have that for future use. So I could just call up this beat as a starting point and try it against different kits. I could save that as a kit pattern here.
As a kit pattern, yes.
So you just go to the Save menu and say Save Kit Pattern and put D's Beat 1. And now that's going to show up anytime I go to this kit pattern. You'll see that in the list.
It doesn't save the actual kit with it, it just saves the pattern.
That's correct. If you want to save everything, that's what's called a preset.
Presets, yeah.
So you can go into the Save menu and say Save Preset, and you see it says in parentheses Machine State. So that's the way that you would save everything that you're hearing all into one file. And it actually embeds everything. Your audio samples, or all of that audio data is also put into the preset. So that guarantees you, if you move computers or 10 years from now and you're on some new machine, you don't have to worry about having all these other samples located and searched. And that's something that, you know, with a lot of programs, even most host programs and everything, can be very frustrating when you go back to a project later and now you realize, oh, I don't have everything that I needed for this.
Yeah, happens all the time to me.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I realized with Nerve, I wanted to make something that you're just guaranteed to not have to search for files and be dealing with these please locate this file type of dialogues. It's so frustrating. So even when you're just working in your host program, Logic or Cubase or whatever you use, when you hit save, it actually embeds. It's the same as saving a preset like I just showed you on the screen there. That happens automatically when you save your host song. It puts all of that data, including all the sound data, and zips it up to try not to take as much space on your hard disk. You know, zips everything up into one little chunk of data that it gives to the host to save inside the host file. So yeah, that makes it sort of worry-free. If you're collaborating with friends, you can just send them your host project, and it'll open up with your beats blazing and all that.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, so that's that. So that was the kit pattern that I saved here, which was just the pattern information. You can see here in the top right, you can hold multiple patterns at once, of course, which is of course desirable to do. So you can, so for instance, I could load now a different kit pattern. If I click on, instead of A, which is where we made this pattern, I can click on to B, and now I could select a different kick pattern. And now we have, of course, an A and a B pattern. We can listen to. I think that's a little too busy for a track, but we've got this one here. And if you wanted to, you could jam between these on MIDI notes or automate it in the host, so you could have little moments for it.
Oh, so you've set it so you can actually automate that. That's how you would trigger the patterns, basically.
That's right. There's one of two different ways you can trigger the patterns there. One would be from a MIDI track in your host, which is playing this instrument. So in most hosts, like in Logic here, we have an instrument track which is holding Nerve.
Yep.
So I'll bring that into the foreground here, and we have this, we haven't named it yet, but instrument 5 here you can see is holding Nerve.
Yep.
And then if we created a MIDI region here, we could send notes to do a variety of things. It can switch patterns, the notes can trigger these pads.
Play the pads, yeah.
If you want to just program in-house. Or it can do some of the other features we haven't gone over yet as well. So that's one way, and the other way would just be use an automation lane, like automating any parameter in a host. They usually let you see an automation lane, like Logic, for instance, does. So you could automate this, so you could actually just hit record in your host program and switch between these. And if the automation recording is enabled at that time in the host, then it will record your mouse clicks of switching between these.
That's very cool.
So yeah. Okay, so if you want to take a beat that you have and do something very simple, like chain it into, say, be a 4-bar pattern, that's really easy to do in Nerve. So what I'm going to do here is take our whole beat that we have and just I'm going to drag copy this with the Option key held down, or Alt on the PC, and make it a 4-bar chain. You can see this word chain to the left.
Yeah.
So now I have, instead of just a 1-bar pattern, as it cycles in the host sequencer, you'll see it'll go from bar 1 that we have here to bar 2, bar 3, and now what I want to do is add an extra kick drum right here. So now I have my
as easy as that.
Little turnaround, that's right. So it's very easy to get something that's just going to repeat up to 8 bars long. It's just that simple. But if you want to do more intricate things like jamming between various patterns, which can lead to really interesting creative results if you just have spot moments where it's switching the beat up to something else and back. I personally prefer to use the MIDI notes so I can play the different changes in rather than try to click the mouse on them.
Yep.
I like that sort of mentally too. Instead of staring at the screen, you can sort of just close your eyes almost and just feel changing between them and kind of learn by how it feels to switch which ones sound like which, and work out a sort of arrangement of changing between your patterns that way.
Yeah.
So that's my typical workflow. I'll get some sounds I think sound good for what I'm going for in the track. So once I've got my drum kit sort of in the ballpark, I'll get some basic patterns together. And then in Nerve, I like to just load in different kit patterns that weren't even stuff I necessarily programmed myself, but load in various grooves and put these on the various letters of the A through L, and then be able to jam between those if I want to have spot moments. I'll usually leave one open just as a simple way to just get everything to sort of stop if you want to have a break or something like that. Yeah. So I'll just sequence it out that way, and then what you're left with in your host program is a very simple MIDI track. Yeah. All it has is these pattern changes in there for the most part. And then sometimes if I want some little extra tricky bits that go even more crazy than what the patterns do, there's this repeater bar built into Nerve. You can see above the logo along the bottom here is this repeater section. And that allows you to do sort of beat repeating type of effects in a very sort of unique way, where it's actually repositioning the sequencer playback. So it's re-triggering these pads to get you these sort of fill, stutter effect type of things. And that's unique compared to using an audio-based beat repeating plugin, say, because it's actually re-triggering the steps every time, which sonically sounds a little bit different potentially, as well as it can follow the groove that you have inside of Nerve. So it'll actually swing if you're doing a 16th repeats. It'll match your swing on them, and it'll also generate MIDI notes. One thing we haven't touched on, Nerve can also send MIDI notes out. So if you wanted to trigger another software synthesizer or software drum machine or something like that, you can use Nerve as a sequencer brain with which to trigger the sounds in something else. So, so the repeater bar, I can show that really quickly. If we just go to our pattern here, and I can do little fills. I could do it with the mouse. Now you can see it's just repeating over these first 4 steps. And if I switch up here, just drag up to the 8th note, now you see it's doing the first 2 steps. Yeah. And the first step, 30 seconds, and so on. Yeah. So if you have a little swing on, something like that, you can see now it's going to have the swing feel.
It swings it as well, yes. Yeah. You showed me that before, that's nice.
Yeah, it's a good way to get little fills in. I like to do that live. What I do with these DJ type of sets is I'll use Nerve as a sort of percussion brain. So I'm using it with a lot of percussion samples. I use Nerve itself with more electro-y percussion sounds, and then I use Ableton Live software with some of the drum racks. So that's just a way to hold additional percussion samples, and I trigger. So Nerve's really playing both at once, and I externally can crossfade between the more electro-y sounds and the percussive sounds. And then I have remoted up the repeating, which you can do with MIDI notes for those different repeats. So while I have a full track that I've already produced playing through the PA, I can now mix in either more electro-y or more percussive sort of organic sounds on the top and sort of stutter, repeat them, and affect those. So yeah, I love Nerve for the live thing. It was partly designed, you know, with deadmau5 for his live performances in mind, as something, you know, not to make an entire song with live on stage, but something to really add in complementing things. If you're listening to a track, you hear something in your head as an idea, you can get it out very quickly this way. So it's really easy to, whether it's a kick, snare, or whatever type of thing, it's very easy to just grab a blank pattern, program it in either by playing it or by clicking with the mouse, and then mix it in live on your DJ mixer, you know, seconds later. So it's fun for that sort of thing. And the repeater makes it a little more fun to be able to jam on whatever you've just done, so you can get kind of more spontaneous, fluid fills. Yeah. And then record that in. If you're doing a studio production like we're doing today, then you just record that in as MIDI notes if you want, and then that way every time it hits that point in the song, you'll get that little fill.
Now the repeater you can use on a per sound basis, can't you?
That's right. Pretty much it defaults to being on for all pads, so you're just repeating your entire pattern. But you can see this effects LED here in the lower right. This is a per pad setting. So if I click on, say, for instance, snare, and say, you know what, I want my kick and snare to continue. So I'm going to click on kick here, turn off effects. Here's another kick which isn't playing, so I don't have to worry about that. And snare, here's the snare that's playing. I'll turn it off on that. So now my kick and snare will continue, but all the other bits, the hi-hat and everything else, will repeat. Yeah. If I had a little more busy of a thing too, you'd hear it a bit better. But but that's just going to go into chaos. I'm not going to go there. So great. So let's try maybe something in terms of this track and using Nerve in our real-world scenario. Yeah, absolutely. My very rough track. That's right. So we're just getting going here, despite all the time spoken. So what I'm going to do now is just init Nerve back to its default state. We see a menu here which can bring to init and say init everything. So I'm just wiping it back to its clean slate, how it comes. And now what I'm going to do is take the samples that I grabbed from your track. So here, for instance, is a kick drum, and I'll drag that onto the kick drum pad. I knew that was a kick drum pad, of course, because I've worked a lot with Nerve. Nerve has pad labels as well that you can init here to suggested if you want to see a suggested layout. And the good thing about doing that is all of the patterns are going to follow the suggested layout. So it's a good idea to drag your samples to the suggested places. That way you can bring up a kit pattern from someone else's made, and it might fit your song just magically. So whenever possible, I always will follow this suggested layout. It makes your kit more useful for recycling it in the future and all that as well. Although in this case, at least so far, we're not going to have a full kit. I'm just going to grab the kick and the snare and throw those on here. So we have your chosen kick drum and snare drum. And then we have a few loops you can see here. There's 3 loops that you had going. So one other thing we haven't touched on yet is that Nerve can handle loops, and that's what it's going to be doing here. I'm going to drag in these 3 loops.